So let's have a look at how to lay out arpeggio shapes in a really systematic and very effective way. When I started learning arpeggios, and I should probably say that if this is the first video watching in this series, please go back and watch the first one first. You can find that by looking around this video if you're on YouTube. The way I learned to lay out arpeggios was simply in the most practical way with regards to having your fingers placed on each fret here, because that's the whole philosophy of the cage shapes, C, A, D, E, D, and so on, is that you have one finger per fret, and then you play everything like this without moving your fingers in either direction. And so I learned to play, let's say, just a C major 7th arpeggio, following that specific rule of not having to move your fingers. And you could play an A minor 7th arpeggio in the same way. I think something like that. I've forgotten most of it because it's such an ineffective strategy, really. Because every arpeggio shape looks different. Because you're not focusing on the shape, you're focusing on convenience here. So what I did instead was start building a rule of, say, okay, I want to have 2 notes on the first string, then I want to have 1 note on the next, and then I want to have 2 notes on the next string, and then 1 note on the next, and then 2 notes. So I get shapes that look like this, for instance. Or I get a shape that looks like this. It requires me to go beyond the 4 frets. It requires me to just stretch a little bit here and go for 5 frets instead, because that's a major third, right? 2 whole tones. So I just need to go from this to this, and this is manageable in order to play these arpeggios. But suddenly I get shapes that I can use, because now I can build a sequence, for instance. I can build a sequence like, and then I can play that in each of these shapes. So what you basically do in order to do this is that you mark out the notes on the fretboard, right? All the notes of the C major, for instance, and then you just take C here and say, okay, if I were to build a 2-1-2 shape, as I call them, from that C, I basically have to go for C, then every second note up to the E. Then instead of taking the next note on the same string, I want that next note there. So now I've taken every second note from the C. Now I'm up there. Then I need, if I'm building 4-note arpeggios, I need to go up 2 notes. Oh, there I have my next note, and then my root note again right there, 2. Then I have 1 note there. And you could do this, just listen to this. This is the old way of doing it. And this is the new way of doing it, where I have 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Right? And the cool feature here is that, let's say I'm playing a thing like this, right? If I want to play that in another shape, or, you know, I can play it in any shape now because I have the same layout of the notes instead of having, so it's super easy to, sequence, because whatever I learn in one shape, I can also play in another, which really reduces the learning time massively. But then we were talking about in the previous video how a melody is really going from a chord note, passing through a scale note that's not on the chord, and then to another chord note. And this becomes super easy in this method here, because let's say I have, let's just take the C major, or no, let's change the arpeggio. Why not? Let's take an A minor 7th instead, which has notes in the high E string, 12th fret, and then 8th fret on. This is the A, right? this is the third of A, C, and this is the fifth of A, and the seventh would be G. So if I laid it out on one string, which is a pretty uncomfortable way of playing, but you know, not that practical. But if you want to do sliding, whatever, get that sound, then that might be a pretty good layout. But let's lay them out in the system here. So 2 notes, and then the A is in the 10th fret on the B string. Then I have the 12th and the 9th fret on the G string. So I have 2, 1, 2, because I've constructed it in that way. But as I can see here, I have scale notes in between, because a chord is basically jumping over a note, right? To get an interval, like, right? And so I have that 10th fret on the E string. I can include that. So I now have that middle note there, and on the G string there, I have that 10th fret again. That's also a scale note. And if I just leave this alone, the lonely note, and I just add these 2 notes, then I get the following. And then the next cool thing is that we guitarists, we tend to like ending and beginning on our 4th and our 1st finger. These outer points here seems to be our comfortable home zones, right? So when you just do this, when you just play and use this little scale shape as it's become, you know, this arpeggio slash scale, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 6 notes at least in it. We had 4. Now we have 1 extra there and 1 extra there, so that's 6. That's almost the entire C major scale, right? You're having 6 notes, and we have 7 notes in the major scale. So we're playing almost all of the notes here. But it sounds like A minor. So now you can't go wrong. You can't play anything in this freaking shape that doesn't sound like A minor. So now we have constructed a way of sounding like A minor by playing the A minor arpeggio. And then, for instance, you have another arpeggio right here, that same shape. If I start from the A on the D string, and I build my little 2-1-2 shape here from this note, A here, then I skip the B, go to the C, and then I have 2 notes there. Then I want to go from C to D to E, and I play that on the G string in the 9th fret, so 7, 10 on the D, and then 9th on the G, and then I have 2 notes here. I have one in the 8th and one in the 10th. Right, a whole tone apart. So that's another 2-1-2 shape. But then, because I don't have a note in between here, I just use the chromatic note. So I get that cool sound, which can sound bluesy. If you want it to, and it can sound jazzy if you want it to. But so I use that chromatic note in between. And I use the 9th of the A in the 9th fret here, so I have 3 notes now on. And it all sounds A minorish. This is another 2-1-2 shape down here that I'm putting. And another. Right? So I really get a cool tool here, and I can then shift it to another arpeggio, like the C major. So now I really, instead of this being a haphazard way of, okay, I know where the arpeggio notes are, like in the old way there, and then I can kind of, rest on them, go from chord note to chord note. I have a specific way of practicing sequences that I can learn within a specific mathematical shape on the fretboard, and then I can apply that sequence to any of my arpeggio shapes that are everywhere. Right? So suddenly I just get this ability to just flow in and out, and I'm always in a It's such an amazing tool. And I can start practicing sequences. And by just practicing a sequence in one shape, I can apply it to all other shapes and really get a bang for my buck here. That makes me learn incredibly fast compared to, practicing 100 different, like we have 100 different ways of, fingering each chord. You can do that in infinite ways of fingering chords. There are 1,000 ways of fingering all chords. And the same thing goes for arpeggios. You can lay them out in a multitude of ways. But if you use this simple strategy here of 2, 1, 2, and then putting a chord note in between, or a scale note, sorry, you really get a systematic way of learning something that can seem quite daunting. So that's the whole point of doing this.